Hey, hello everyone. Very good evening, good morning. So, welcome to LFDT Healthcare Special Interest Group. So, LFDT Healthcare Special Interest Group, earlier it was called as the Hyperledger Special Interest Group, is part of the LFDT big umbrella. And we normally conduct on third Wednesdays of every month our monthly call, and we mostly will have one presentation from an industry expert. But this month, due to some unavoidable circumstance, we are conducting it in on this fourth Wednesday, and all are welcome. And before getting into that, I believe my screen is visible, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the antitrust policy, please read through it. So it is from competitors, anyone, all are welcome here. And when you are opening up, please be ensured whatever can be uh, like openly told in the open forum. You are welcome to tell, and please read through this, and we welcome everybody. So all are one and the same, all are welcome. And let me share another screen. Going to, or I will pause and then go ahead with another share. Give me a sec. Let me open today's meeting agenda. So this meeting agenda is already available, like in the wiki page, that Atlassian page. Hope my screen is visible again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I will keep editing also. So this is the general meeting link, and recordings will be available in the SIG, like Healthcare SIG YouTube channel of the LFTT. So here, we know the people who are here today, so we can skip this part, and there are only we have our speaker as the new joinee, and I will have will include. So I believe you will be having
Wow.
so please have your LF IDs and then include it. So our count, it has increased that yesterday I haven't checked it, so it has increased. So slowly but steadily we are increasing our community, and today we are going to have Mr. Rama Rao, like founder and CEO of Bloqcube. So he will be presenting on healthcare and blockchain, an idea whose time has come now. Yes, exactly. Its time has come now. A lot of work is being handled, no, and we are eager to listen to you. And the earlier meetings are recordings are available here for your easy access. So I believe without any delay, we can directly get into his presentation. We welcome you. Stage is yours.
Thank
Please
you.
go ahead.
Thank you. I'll open up the presentation and you tell me if you can see it.
Yes.
I hope you can see this, right?
Yeah, it is visible now. Thank you.
Uh, yeah, visible, right? Okay.
Yes, good. All good.
So, firstly, thank you very much, Anusuya, and to the uh, I still get locked into saying it Hyperledger Foundation. So you'll pardon me for that with the DLFT, right? And Elizabeth, very interested also given your background. I hope you'll find this also interesting. And so also Professor Jubilant from your perspective too. Um, while I'll be showing you a slide about myself, my association with blockchain actually goes to about 2013, 2014, when I was the CFO for Novartis in Russia. And one of the earliest talks called The Trust Machine came out in an article in The Economist. There was a whole magazine section dedicated to it. And that piqued my interest for multiple reasons. And about in 2017, 2018, we set up Bloqcube. And Bloqcube is, to the best of my knowledge, one of the earliest blockchain-based e-clinical platforms to accelerate clinical trials and cut drug costs. So what today I will be covering, apart from the quick introduction and the background in this area of healthcare, is exactly where all blockchain can be used or is used. And then give you a little bit of an example of Bloqcube, which is one of the pioneers in its application in the area of clinical trials. Uh, and I'll be talking also why clinical trials are important. I would be then coming up at the end to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of why it has not grown the way it has grown, and then do a quick summary on terms of where it is and open it up for questions. That is the plan of action for today. Now, the topic title, for those who are familiar with Mark Twain, is it's really taken from Mark Twain, is paraphrasing that blockchain is a technology whose time has come. And I say that partly because we are looking not just at the technology, but at the pain points that technology can solve. 3, 4 years back, we looked at purely the technology and were waving a technology hammer and saying, okay, now let's look for problems that it can solve. And so there's always been that frustration amongst people that this is a technology which is looking for problems to solve rather than a problem to solve, which is looking for the right technology. And by way of background, I'm an engineer from IIT Delhi. I'm also have MBAs from IIM Calcutta as well as from INSEAD in France. That has led me to have an international career. And I worked at Eli Lilly and Novartis for about close to 30 years. And that includes a year in a biotech company. And amongst those roles, I had some key roles in the management level and helped to also lead teams that implemented SAP for clinical trial accounting across Novartis. And partly because I was leading some of the critical functions in clinical development finance. Now, that experience also exposed me to some very critical problems. And I felt when I was leaving Novartis in 2016, 2017, that these problems still bedevil the industry, and we need to find a different approach to solving it. I'll come to that later today. Because of this background, I have been very honored by being invited to speak not just here. I have led sessions in bio IT world at Scope, which are amongst the major ones, and more recently, the Prix Galien, which is one of the prestigious uh, prizes for pharma product innovation, has classified Bloqcube as a nominee for the best startup a couple of times. And PM360, which is the pharma marketing magazine, chose Bloqcube as part of innovators in clinical research in December 2024. And I'm referring to software systems. Now, the reason why we brought this all together is I'm honored because we've got a set of advisors who got incredible experience. And one person who's missing here is Dr. Alex Kahana, who's a UN expert in blockchain. And he also comes from he's a veteran as well as from the Israeli Defense Forces. He's a clinician. And so we've got the right mix of clinicians, clinical trialists, IT specialists, regulatory affairs, people all together. Now, talking about healthcare, it's a very complex subject. And it's complex also because the value chain starts from being healthy to falling ill. But in between, there are different stages that take place. You can be well, you can take preventive treatment. You can be in a pre-disease stage. For example, if your family is prone to diabetes, like my family is, and I got diagnosed, about 3, 4 years back. So there is the pre-disease stage in which screening and interception becomes critical. Then there's early stage disease, and the diagnosis, treatment, and then we go all the way across to follow up. Now that's the healthcare cycle. But within that, there are different vendors, different participants, different stakeholders that come into play, which I'll talk about in a moment. Now, 7 years back, when I set up Bloqcube, 8 years back, I was always asked, how do we know that blockchain is the answer to what you're doing? And that is a time when there's so much hype, and the hype was very damaging. So I, looking at various structures, put together a 10-question framework to ask yourself whether blockchain is right for the problem you're trying to solve. And the decision points are, do you have a database that is meeting your needs? If the answer is yes, you don't need a blockchain. Do you want to eliminate intermediaries? If you don't, or can't, or shouldn't, or won't, then this is not the reason, because the blockchain solutions can really help to automate and minimize intermediaries. Then the thing is that whether the output can be worked as a digital asset. If for whatever reason you need to have a big fixed piece of paper, there's nothing you can do. But if data can move across digitally, then there's less issues. You need a permanent record, and is trust an issue? For some time, I taught at New Jersey's Fairleigh Dickinson University a course on blockchain, and we called it more trust. It was a course on trust. Because blockchain is an algorithmic way of replacing the physical trust that we have. And then we get to other parts, which are, do you want to store huge data? Do you need speedy transactions? Do you need a record for compliance? And all these are problems that can be partially solved by blockchain, but blockchain is not the solution. Then we get into whether the records should be public or private. And then we have to discuss whether you want to do it as a permission blockchain or not. So I use this framework in order to assess whether a blockchain is a solution or not, because it's very important. Like they say that phrase, for a cobbler, every problem looks like a nail. We want to be sure that when we are applying blockchain-based solutions, it's for a very specific reason and type. Now, one person who is very well recognized in the world, if not definitely in the US, is Mr. Vinod Khosla, who was an alumnus also of my school, the IIT Delhi. And he's one of the most thought-provoking VCs in Silicon Valley. And he really talked about trust again, because if you want data that is distributed and trustworthy, you need to engage it in the blockchain. And this becomes even more critical when you start looking at AI, because if the the LLMs are working on data and the data is not trustworthy, you can be quite sure you'll get hallucinative response or other responses. And then, this is a quote from the Lancet, which is talking about observation studies, which are very specific studies taking place. Now, for a moment, let me just talk a little bit about the drug development R&D process, where we spend almost $140 billion, or in Indian terms, about 12 lakh crores. So it is a huge, huge amount of every year that is spent. Yeah. And there's a real sequence that takes place. And not only is the sequence a long sequence that's taking place over 6-7 years, it is also taking place with a huge number of volunteers in it. You can have tens, then hundreds, then thousands, and then after that it becomes you cover it. But even then, just remember, if suppose somebody has approved a study in the US and it has to be tested out in, let's say, in Nairobi, the clinician is using their clinical judgment also sometimes to apply their perspective on what has been approved. So it is enormously complex, and that's partly the reason why there is a little bit of care taken before things are accepted. And in terms of time, you can see that the research and development can itself take 3 to 6 years. Preclinical studies, which means when you study the product in either the laboratory or in animals, that's called the preclinical studies. And then you got the clinical trials, which is with human beings. And then after that, there's the FDA approval process that takes place. All these are incredibly complex processes, and we've got to be very cognizant of it as we take things together. Now, often people just don't understand clinical trials, and that's partly because there's a perception in India, for example, you're turning human beings into guinea pigs, and nothing could be further than the truth. Now, firstly, in India, we use a lot of generics. So they do what is called bioequivalency studies. And they get people into a big room, and they're watching watching cricket, playing carom, whatever, and they're taking measurements. But true clinical trials, which are done for innovative products, or let's say somebody's got a form of pancreatic cancer and a scientist has got some idea, it's a lot more complex than that. But the fundamentals don't change. In that each case, you have patients who come to a site. In the site, they're evaluated by a doctor. Then they're always monitored by experts. We call them CRM monitors. And then they're given either a trial drug or they have some diagnostic tests. And the patient is, we call it randomized because statistically you select people based on statistics and not choose people because they're willing to come or because they're your friends, which would introduce a bias. And then once that is done, the data then goes out and you do the payments that are present. But why blockchain in a way? And our hypothesis was that today that there are 45, 47 million people who do clinical trials. And we felt our vision was that why is it that we cannot have 6 billion people doing clinical studies? Now, a clinical study is not one in which you just pop a pill. It could be like during COVID that we've taken a vaccine and 10 of us feel, there's this problem. I'm having very severe headaches and I don't know why that is happening. What can I do? The fact of the matter is you can do nothing about it. Or let's say there's a rare disease and there are 8 patients worldwide. And all of a sudden you need to find a way to get some studies done. You either do it on paper, and today, even in the US, 74% of sites are still getting all the data on paper. And paper, I would assume, would mean Excel also, but primarily paper. So if you want to then start getting into a more decentralized structure where the patient can be anyone, the structure is outside the control framework. The current systems cannot do it, and only a blockchain-based system foundationally is something that will succeed in doing it. Now, we don't think it will just be straight away that all of a sudden 7 billion people come, but there'll be some specific steps that will take place. And in our case, we believe that AI has a critical role to play. Then we build up Web3 based structures, whether it is through on tokenization, etc. Then we get to federated health learning, for example. And then we have to also then look at AI in different forms and shapes. Now, let me now just talk a little bit about the US healthcare system, but it's very similar to what's happening even in the Indian healthcare system and other systems. It just is that different boxes will have different weightage. Now, the insurance companies in the US have a very, very, very huge role to play, and government programs a smaller role to play. But they do play in the whole ecosystem for healthcare. Then you've got the payers and patients that are participating. Then, of course, there are the 3 categories of vendors, which is people like software vendors, people like activity vendors, and of course, the pharma and biotech companies that have the molecules. So in today's talk, I will not go point by point to show where blockchain is being used. I will take just a few and at the end summarize by saying, well, here are some use cases and where some companies are tackling in these categories. Now, I want to then say one more thing. By design, we have built it on Hyperledger Fabric, and we are kind of exceptional there. But a lot of other companies have used either private protocols or they have taken things from Ethereum or others to build what they have built. So I'm not going to be judgmental over here. I will explain why we have done what we have done, but it does not mean or suggest that the others who have worked on it and chosen some paths are in any way inferior. Now, one great example, really great example, this is about 4 or 5 years back, of people applying blockchain was something which is a very good product market fit. And this has been the supply chain. So the US built out some regulations which are really saying that we need to be able to track everything that is, we have to do a product recall. Now, a few years back, for example, there was a Chinese manufacturer of one chemical part of what they call API. Now, this is not the software API, this is the pharmaceutical API. So it stands for active pharmaceutical ingredient. So people are taking for blood pressure 2 types of drugs, losartan and valsartan. And this was a very small part of it in the Chinese manufactured chemical that went into it. But it was supposed to be having a lot of side effects, adverse effects. Some even talked of being carcinogenic. All of a sudden, all this had to be withdrawn. Now, imagine if you had to withdraw such huge amounts. How does that process go? How do you structure it? So it was not easy to do it. So the FDA came up with what they called the DSCA Act to handle that. And that's where they did one of the earliest usages of a blockchain to build a solution. And of course, if you look down below, you'll see the sort of extremely smart people who collaborated for it. There was IBM there, KPMG, Merck, Walmart that brought it together. And they chose a blockchain solution for reasons that we all know. You know, you'll have a shared ledger, you would have permissioning structure, you'll have smart contracts, you can get trust, which is algorithmically ensured, privacy, and modular. But the critical factor of this whole project was that the pilot showed that if you used a blockchain-based solution, the process of identification of product or recalling products can go tremendously faster. In currently, they said it would have taken 3 days, and with the blockchain technology, said partners could be alerted in 10 seconds. And this now, for example, in ChatGPT, we do have situations where we press a button and we can get complete things. But at that time, it was pretty revolutionary. It was one of those very impressive readouts that took place. If you can then pause the recording over here for the next 3, 4 slides, I would appreciate it, Anusuya. Yeah.
I have to pause recording
So if you take a look, yeah, please, for the next 3, 4 slides.
from the slide.
So one of the for
Rama,
this slide and 3 more slides after this.
yeah. Please tell me when I have to resume.
Give you a second for that. So the average cost of ransomware attacks has been, the data breach cost has been up to 10 million per instance. In fact, in some cases, they've asked for almost multi-million dollars of ransomware. So we assert that the vulnerability of any system or structures to ransomware attacks comes down when you use a blockchain-based system or distributed ledger system. And this really happened even during COVID, when you'd have a situation where very leading companies were affected and they had to go back to paper principles going forward. What I see also from a blockchain perspective for the future is not just that. It is when we start doing what is called federated learning. And in federated learning, we have multiple partners collaborating without the need to exchange the data. So you can process these data sets securely and scale. So let's imagine for today, you're doing a study on tuberculosis. And, of course, there are lots of leading Indian institutions. Let's say there is the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. There is the JJ Hospital, let us say, in Mumbai. And they're collaborating, let us say, with Weill Cornell in New York. Now, in a conventional system, maybe the data would all have to go to a centralized repository in order to derive meaningful data to explain what you wanted to do. But if you do with the federated learning, you can use a blockchain to replace those processes. So it can give you better security. You have the decentralized structure because you can have not one hospital, not 10 hospitals, but maybe 1,000 hospitals. And this becomes especially important when you have things like epidemics that may take place. The COVID pandemic is a classic case. Even not just there, but even when you, let's say today, for example, weight loss drugs have become very popular. And we may want to exchange data on what is the post-marketing surveillance, what is happening after a drug has been registered, what are people reporting, and how do we share that data by keeping the patient privacy careful and put it the structure so that you get the data in real time. That's where the improved transparency comes in. And incentive mechanisms can also be facilitated. We quoted on a grant from the UN, which we did not win, where we wanted to persuade in sub-Saharan Africa girls to take, a Gardasil type vaccination to vaccinate them against cervical cancer. And we thought that if we do it in the conventional way, it may be a challenge. But as these are savvy kids, we would maybe give them like a 1/10 of a Bitcoin. I'm talking this is some years back, not when the Bitcoin has come to $120,000, but when it was more like $10,000. Yeah, they said we'll give about $500 or something per patient. And by giving that, we're also creating, without creating a huge ethics issue, we would create an incentive issue for them um, to do the follow up and do everything correctly. And that's the beauty of a blockchain based system, because you can also design incentive mechanisms that will help the sharing and participation data. And then the data privacy is very particular. Now, this becomes also very important when you're doing, say, cancer studies, when you want to get the results of one cancer trial to be used to redesign or influence another cancer trial. And if you have a blockchain based system for all the data, then all that data can be shared in a federated way and speed up the working of the trial. So, I'll be talking in a moment about clinical trials, by giving the example of blockchain, but you can use it for decentralized patient recruitment. There is Patientory, which is actually giving a crypto token for people to participate on it. And I showed you, for example, there is Lancet had talked about showing observation studies, and it is still a tough area, and that's why we're amongst, let's say, I can count on my hand, maybe only 10 companies worldwide that are in this, and in the US, maybe only 2 companies that are involved in it. Second area are observation studies and traceability of data. So, in give you an idea of observation study, we did one in Puducherry in India, and they were planning a trial and observation study of 850 patients, and that was going to take them 12 months. They gave us 150 patients. It took us 4 weeks to design what had to be designed and coded it. And then we completed the study in 12 days. We went back to them, this was January 2020, and said, give us the rest of the patients. And said, no, 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 no. And then what happened? COVID came and shut the hospital down for a year. Now, at the end of the day, when you bring such data together, the patient is the one and the clinician is the one that is the ultimate beneficiary. So speed, accuracy, and auditability becomes very critical. In big hospitals now in India also we have this, but a lot of hospitals are still working with paper. In the US, for example, there is there's Epic and Cerner, and which are controlling a big chunk of electronic health records and interoperability. Now, what we are trying to assert over here is that if a patient is actually filling in the data and putting the data together, you want to be sure that if it comes together in a decentralized ledger, then you're protecting all your sources. And then with the EHR, don't have to, you do worry, but you're less concerned about mistakenly sharing uh, personal health information, which is not allowed. But you can also start ensuring that patients own their data. And HI is the Health Innovation Exchange. It is one open source software, which is giving people, the patients, the right to build up their own software, not the software, their own data records, which they can then monitor and transfer. Right now, what happens is, like in most hospital systems, if I have a problem and I go to hospital X, and I have a second problem, I go to hospital Y, those records are not exchanged at all. So we're looking at ways in which a blockchain-based solution can bring that. I've already talked about the supply chain and counterfeit drugs, and there's just a huge number of providers that are taking place this, and also guarding against counterfeit drugs, because this is a difficult area that talks about it. This is a little less so, which is in terms of telemedicine and IoT. But I think the point about IoTs is more from an edge computing perspective. So, for example, we have a supply chain solution where there is a, a small product that is attached with the shipment, and that it gives 5 parameters. The geo tags it, it gives you light, shock, heat, and humidity. And that way, that goes into a blockchain so you can understand the provenancing of the product spot on. Now, that's obviously very critical for certain products. It may not be critical for all products. For example, there's something called a CAR-T product, which is a chimeric antigen receptor T cell product, where they take the T cells out of the patient, send it to a facility somewhere else. They rework those T cells and then send it back, and then it's injected back in the patient, and it becomes like a cancer-seeking missiles to kill the cancers. Now, we want to be sure that when this product is going through that supply processes, both through the engineering facility and then back from the engineering facility, it is maintained in full categories, and that's where a blockchain engine can help. And this also gets critical when you do clinical development work, where the FDA can then say, okay, tell me and show me how did you know that the temperature records were stable when this shipment took place. Then we get to places like, when you look at research work, where you're looking at tons of molecules and bringing that together. And this is where we can also store the data. And you might wonder, why is that so critical? There have been cases where in the preclinical, that is, where the animal studies take place and the lab studies take place, data integrity issues have been recognized. My ex company got approval from the FDA, I think it was in 2019, that for a drug which was meant for a very specialized rare disease, but was costing almost $2 million or so. And after they got that approval, when the M&A team was doing the due diligence, they found that there was some record that didn't make sense. And when they found that it didn't make sense, they were really worked up about it. So they had to go back to the FDA and confess this. And if I recall correctly, the CEO decided that his whole bonus for that time period would be cancelled. And if you can imagine, the CEO's bonus got cancelled, how many other people's bonus also got cancelled? And all because the data integrity was not secure during the research stage, which was used in order to increase the value of the product. Then we start getting into some the security, which you all know, and then of course COVID and vaccine passports were created in some countries. This is just like the DigiYatra that you have in India, which is also a blockchain-based system, and that is for general travel. This made it even easy in some cases. So now I'll go very rapidly through how we at Bloqcube tackled this and created a full solution. And we were looking at clinical trial operations because, as I said, the whole clinical trial process is very complex, starting from stage one. And the problem today, the pain points today were that people are using multiple systems. Sites sometimes use 6 systems. That's the McKinsey study which shows. But they've also talked about how they use up to 21 systems. And there are a lot of operational inefficiencies, and you really don't get true real-time data. And as we have moved to what is called decentralized clinical trials, which means you can do a clinical trial at a home or at a doctor's clinic close by, you have issues with that in terms of ensuring data integrity. Data integrity is, the falsification of data. And, while blockchain would not help this, but still, the dean of Stanford University a couple of years back had to resign because some of the work he did as a clinician 20 years back in Alzheimer's disease study was considered at fault. And the other one is the delay that takes place for patients. Now, what we have built we built this thing on a web-based platform, and it runs in different formats. It runs on the cloud, and unlike any of our competitors, it's a blockchain smart contract driven structure, you know. And there are 4 critical users that it is targeting. It's targeting the doctor, it's targeting the administrator, it's targeting the PI, the person who's actually doing the trial, and the monitors. And ideally speaking, we can reduce the number of monitors that we use dramatically because the system itself is doing the monitoring process. And these are some screens taken from one of the systems that we supplied to one of our clients. And you can see how crisp and clear it looks as we build it up. I told you already that we got our trademark approved after 3 years of of battle with the USPTO office, and recognized one of the earliest in the area of clinical trials, blockchain-based systems. And this is how some of the dashboards looked when we did a trial in Puducherry, which I said, where we could see in real time exactly when that person was getting the data. And this is again important because when you start making big studies, sometimes the data is falsified by the person who is monitoring or the clinical study coordinator. And you want to avoid all those from happening. This is an example of how it looked like in our Hyperledger fabric-driven supply chain module, where we shift up some breast cancer tissues from where we live to a laboratory in Florida, and then got the data back. And we could track literally on an hourly basis exactly where the truck was. And this is available on a global basis. And you can see in this the temperature recording. The reason why this becomes important is you may, for matter, have, let's say, a refrigerated truck. But when you do a clinical study, you're expected to then submit data that evidences that everything was okay. And this is the way in which we are in a position to do it. We had some pretty good customer responses and about it. So in the interest of time, I won't go through it. We have multiple modules that are operating in the structure. And I'll point out our finance module is what we think is leverages the power of a blockchain because there's a smart contract behind it that anchors in this case, the chain code to execute multiple transactions and save sources and time. And some of the awards that we got at Consensus last year, we were one of the top 40 semi-finalists. There were only two healthcare companies, Patientory and us. So if you throw a big place, which again testifies to the innovation that is there behind what we have built. Yeah. And what I find even more is CB Insights, which is one of the leading vendor evaluations and technology evaluation platforms in the US, said that we had an innovation advantage over our biggest competitors. Yeah. And this is how it looked. At the end of the day, healthcare is not what you and I, as relatively well to do people, have. It's when you can take the healthcare down to the rural areas, to the villages which are far. For example, yesterday I was listening to PBS broadcast in the US, where rural hospitals are closing down, and it's taking over an hour for anybody to come to a hospital. Now, if you then take the hospital to them through telehealth, for example, and see that the data is securely kept in a blockchain-based system, you'll find a greater acceptance of managing healthcare. And here you can see this is a clinical trial where they were signing off on what is called the e-consent for doing the trials. Gartner Group, which, as I suspect most are from a technology background on this webinar, Gartner Group has pinned us as one of the 6 or 7 vendors of healthcare and blockchain solutions. And they said it was still coming down, and this is the challenge, that it has still not gone out from the peak of inflated expectations. So we are working towards that. So this is taken from McKinsey, and they were talking on payments, but they were talking also the impact of blockchain and the challenge that we all have. And this is something we need to take as a community, is that it is stuck at the innovation level. What they claim is that until we start getting products that are more impactful, and people will still not understand it, and they may think that it is a clunky solution that is looking for a problem to solve. Like to kind of come to a close by talking a little bit about the summary of what I had shown. So there are multiple projects, people are moving together, it's coming together. It's very, very slow. There is a study done by the Diffusion of Innovation in Clinical Trial Software, which talks that it takes almost about 7 years on an average to get this done. Let me stop over here and just turn it over for about 10 minutes of questions, because I've covered a huge amount of material at a very rapid pace. But all through, we took great care choosing Hyperledger Fabric, we compared it to Ethereum, and some of our competitors have used Ethereum, but I felt strongly that at this stage, for a clinical trial software, that um, our decision was right, and that decision has been validated multiple times when I go for to webinars or seminars or go to conferences about it. We do plan to tokenize what we have done in order to create tokenized clinical trial data, and that's where we might use an Ethereum-based platform. We have not made any decision on that yet. We're also working in the area of AI because now we know that with our clinical trial software system, our customers can have letter perfect data. But what we will then do is put some AI structures on top of it. Jim, you have a question. Let me stop here. Go ahead, sir.
Sure. Yeah, good presentation. Actually, two things. One, I'm hoping I can get a PDF of this slide deck you had because I wasn't able to get all the slides
Sure.
as you went through them. The second thing, though, is I will say the concept of using Fabric over Ethereum is a massively good one because if you look at Fabric versus Ethereum, fundamentally, Ethereum is never used as a public blockchain. It's a
Uh-huh.
permission blockchain every time. And so the problem is you're always adding permissioning on top of Ethereum for any
Uh-huh.
application that matters. So in
Uh-huh.
Fabric, I've gone the other way and built Fabric solutions where we actually added a public side to the solution.
Okay.
And so
Nice.
yeah, so the point of it is if you're doing things like my healthcare records, absolutely going to be
Uh-huh.
permission. But on the other hand, if you want to see what are available services from a clinic, you'd say, no,
Uh-huh.
no, no, I want that to be public. And would do all that
Uh-huh.
in a single marketplace in a sense. And so the user would never know. They would just say, okay, well, if I want to do something like get my health records, then I have to enroll and
Uh-huh.
I go through the registration process. But if you're just there to say, what does this clinic offer? Then you're in the right place. We don't restrict that to anybody. So it makes more sense
That's
that way. The other thing is you're talking
that's
about tokenization that makes sense. And in the
yeah.
Fabric world, there's a new version of that coming out that will
Okay.
have built tokenization. And then the
Oh,
thing I'm
okay.
looking at, what I'm trying
Yeah.
to do is um, go to a different place altogether where we mix decentralized data sources with something called a VSLT, which is a virtual smart ledger technology, different than DLT.
Okay.
But Fabric would be a
Okay.
core part of that because you're to your point, you can get 3,000 TPS on what I call layer
Uh-huh.
one with Fabric.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so if you then go ahead and, in a sense, use it as a layer two with, call it a
Uh-huh.
distributed data architecture, you could take that up
Uh-huh.
to, 30, 40, 50,000
Cool.
easily, a 10x
Cool. Cool.
improvement easily.
That's great, Jim. And so later, let's connect also. My email is here. There's a third piece that I'd also talk about in the for the benefit of people here. As all of us know that when you use Ethereum, you've got to pay gas fees. Now, if you're a user of the system, and let's say you go to your finance guy and say, I'm buying a system, it costs X, and it costs a gas
Yep.
fee Y. Firstly, I'd say our mission was to cut costs. So I really didn't see the point of adding gas fees. The second is that with gas fees being linked to Ethereum and Ethereum prices being, volatile, it'd be very difficult for any budgetary person to figure out exactly how and what, when they would be able to do it. So the fact that you'd have to pay gas fees for your competition efficiency or inefficiencies was something that was a deal breaker for me moving forward. When you get
Yeah,
to
I did a
tokens,
supply
it's
chain
less of an issue.
architecture. Yeah, I went through a
Yeah.
supply chain architecture. And
Okay.
the funny part was the guy who owned the company started out with, well, it has to be
Yeah.
Ethereum because that's where he's coming from. He had no knowledge of how any of this stuff works on the inside. And
I
so he
see.
was correct that the world
Right.
thinks that Ethereum is blockchain and it's the way to do it.
Right.
And sure, it is blockchain, but that's having looked at real blockchains and built some,
Right.
it's legacy blockchain technology, period. Just like you have legacy, you could say
Right.
mainframe COBOL apps.
Right.
DLT technology on Ethereum is legacy. And so most of what people are trying to
Exactly.
do is overcome the limitations of which you pointed out correctly, not only the permissioning problem where you have to add Besu or something like that to get real
Uh-huh.
permissioning. Second, you have a gas fee built in because it's a primitive architecture
Uh-huh.
for for cost management, which is idiotic. So going back 30 years ago, you had far more elegant costing systems, as you pointed out, and things like Epic, Cerner, and so on, much
Right.
more flexibility over there. When you come down to Ethereum, it's like, oh, we don't do that. We're very simple.
Exactly.
And finally, the third one that's
Exactly.
really a bigger problem
Uh-huh.
is their concept of how to manage transactions on a ledger is wrong. So they have this concept of this is the way to do consensus. And it's like, nope, you guys aren't
Right.
even close. And so
Right.
their fundamental architectures of all that is wrong. To your point, though, and especially in the supply chain use case and what you're bringing up here, is when I helped engineer this supply
Yeah.
chain architecture, the biggest thing, and the reason tokens do matter, it's not just for payments and stuff like that. Certainly gas fees, we had to eliminate those from the network because we were going to, in a sense, cost and charge things differently. But the bigger thing was, which you hit here also, and is key to healthcare, is optimization. And the way you get
Mm-hmm.
optimization in any network system, it has nothing to do with the technology, is I'll call it behavioral economics. And if
Mm-hmm.
you say, okay, what we're trying to do is incent, in a sense, the stakeholders for what I call optimal behavior for the
Mm-hmm.
network, whatever it is, for all the right outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
All that comes down to a reward system. All of that comes down to behavioral economics. And eventually, tokenization is part of that. That's all. And so the newer Fabric X platform has built-in tokenization capability as well at some point. So that'll be interesting to take a look at.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for mentioning that to me, because you're exactly right. We are sitting and thinking through the tokenomics and the behavioral economics, because we strongly believe that, let's say today I come from a family that is diabetic, and I'm 18 years old, let us say, and I like any college-going kid, I might be prone to excesses. If I were to then incentivize the individual and say, well, we'll give you a certain amount of a token if you can maintain a healthy pattern, just like we incentivize people for getting onto their peloton or getting on and exercising, do the same thing, so that then the burden of the disease becomes less in the latter stages of their life, because you've incentivized them for proper behavior at the former stages of life. Then you can change the paradigm of healthcare from treating a disease to preventing the disease. And that's where you start thinking through the power of what we've got as a blockchain comes into play. And that's why I showed the continuum right at the beginning of what healthcare meant, and not just the conventional way.
Yeah, and your
But
other
thanks,
point, you
Jim.
had it in one of your, yeah, you had it
Let's
in one of your
connect up.
earlier
Yeah,
slides, was the challenge of rural healthcare. So I'm very familiar with that because while your
right.
context is probably India for rural
Ah,
healthcare, mine is US. And so we have lots of what I call rural locations that have, I'll call it very limited access to, I'll call it normal healthcare. And then figuring out how to do what I call telemedicine, electronic delivery systems,
uh-huh.
and reward systems are all key to, in a sense, getting better outcomes for people who are in poor rural areas for sure of the
Mm-hmm.
US. And
Mm-hmm.
same thing anywhere else in the world as
I think
well.
I think, Jim, that's a great point. Just one clarification. We did a beta test in India for because we wanted to stress test it, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. We're in the running for a solution for providing the solution in a rural healthcare situation in the US.
Hmm.
And we have tried to get NIH grants actually for it, and have failed. But I think this is, when you combine it with telehealth and all the other parameters, there's a huge amount of operational efficiency benefits you can gain when you want to uh, use it for
Yeah, I
rural
have actually
healthcare.
a specific area I'm looking at. So I've been talking to some
I'd
of
love
the
to chat.
healthcare groups up there, and
Yeah,
it's different. It doesn't matter what the, in a sense, the standard
right,
delivery systems are. It's the
right.
ownership in that rural area, as you point out, for healthcare decisions and delivery models have nothing to do with the, I'll call it the standard enterprise ones like Cerner
Right.
or any of those.
Exactly. 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 I'll get in touch with you, Jim. My email is here. Please send that through, or I'll get it
Yeah,
from
it's got your
Anastasia
email
later.
there. I can send you an email just to
Yeah,
connect.
let's connect. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you for your questions. Appreciate it. Any other questions? I've really enjoyed this discussion, this conversation. And frankly, if there's any other thoughts that come to mind for others, feel free to contact me. Um, quite a long time back in 2018 at Consensus, I met the executive director of Hyperledger Fabric. And when I told him what I was planning to do, he didn't look at me, like, oh, you poor soul, you're really trying to climb a mountain here. And we've come a long way, but we still have got a mountain to climb. He was right on that part. But he was quite happy at that time when I said, I'm thinking about Hyperledger Fabric. This is in 2018. And he was we had some good conversation about it. At that time, it was impossible to get anybody who was a coder because everybody were being sucked up by R3 in Wall Street. But we've come a long way since then, and I'm very optimistic about the future based on what we have seen. Yeah.
Cool.
But
Thank you.
if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you all. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rama Rao.
And yes, I'll send a PDF to us. You're welcome.
Yeah.
I hope this has been of value, and have a wonderful day. And if there are no more questions, I'll hop off and go on to my next meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, like we are writing it off. Any other questions from the participants? So if not, thank you, Rama. Like it was a great one. Like we were expecting to listen from you for a quite long time. So people are actually thanking you. Ankita is here. She's thanking you for the presentation. So like you can share the link with me. I will like put it in the wiki page so that all the attendees will be able to go through that PDF.
Will do.
So whenever they
Will do.
are ready to
I'll send that to you.
want to. Yeah. So Ishwar says really informative, and Elizabeth thanks you. And we have got like quite a good number of people also here today. And Jim, very thank you. I suppose he left already. Yes. So anyway,
And I'll just put in the chat, I'll put in my email, and please feel free to contact me.
Yeah,
Amida.
And yes, I will also include this in the wiki page. So that is well and good.
Perfect.
And
so if that's okay, Anusia, I'll drop off. Yeah, I've got to rush
we
for
will
another meeting.
wind it off. And next month,
thank you.
We will have Akshay Kureka coming up with a EHR system. So great.
All are welcome. I'll definitely like to attend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Third
Thank you.
Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. IST, 3 p.m. GMT, 11 a.m. ET. Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good.
Have a good week. Bye. Weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Elizabeth.